Hello there, I'm Anna Marriott from North East Animal Rights, and I'm delighted to welcome you along to another one of our Saturday interviews and to welcome Anita Marriott, who is the vegan mindset coach. So welcome and thank you very much for agreeing to do this for us.
Oh, thank you for having me, Anna. It's a pleasure.
You're very welcome. So we're going to go straight to the questions if that's okay with you. And the first one which I ask everyone is, could you tell us about your vegan journey, how and why you became vegan?
Sure. Yeah, look, it's a long story. It's a 20-year journey, and I'm not going to give it in details, but basically I came from a kind of a homesteading kind of background where we raised and killed our own animals from the earliest childhood memories that I have. But I also had a very strong affinity for animals right from the beginning, from before I can remember, my family tells me. And so I found it very, very sad to be eating my friends, but I was also raised to believe that it was normal, natural, and necessary to eat animals. And so I kind of found a kind of like a some kind of like peace with it, I guess. Particularly because in that environment we genuinely did feel like we loved our animals, and took really good care of them until that one terrible day, of course. And then one day when I was old enough, I was required to help my dad to kill a young pig, and that was a horrific event where I had to hold this young pig while he was being killed. And looking into his eyes, I realized I felt like I'd become a monster. That was a step too far for me to actually be involved in the killing process. And from that day on, I never ate pig again. I was about 16 at that point. So that was the beginning of my journey. And then it was sort of 20 years later before I actually made the full transition to vegan. But then it was an up and down journey of then going to veterinary school, and basically being indoctrinated into being a servant of the industries, and being told that they were necessary. And again, this whole being encouraged to think of animal products as being a necessary part of the human diet and so forth. And so I went backwards and forwards, but I would gradually transition to vegetarian over the 5 years after I'd graduated, and then remained a vegetarian for about 10 years with the blinkers firmly on regarding the non-meat animal products, until one day I saw a poster of a dairy calf that just finally like hit me right in the chest, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. So that was really my journey. So it was a grand total of 20 years. I wish it had been so much faster, of course, like everyone.
Yeah. I think, mine was quite some in relation to I was vegetarian first and vegetarian for quite some time, and then I went vegan. But yeah, that means it's interesting to hear that you come from that farming background, and obviously you kind of like you directly it's very hands on. So I know we are going to talk about the vegan mindset coach later on, but could you tell me why you decided that being vegan wasn't enough and you wanted to do more and you became an activist and the first piece of activism that you did and how it made you feel?
Well, okay, so right from the very beginning, really, as soon as I made that mindset switch and now saw the world through that vegan lens, I realized it wasn't enough to not share. And I think, like a lot of new vegans, I immediately shared with all the people around me. So I think my first sort of act of activism really was just trying to like share and convince and convert all the people in my life. That was probably the very first act. Beyond that, when they didn't listen, my next act was really to order a bunch of vegan shirts online and start wearing them, because I'm like, okay, now I'm going to advertise to the world. And at that point, I didn't know any other vegans. I had no vegan community. I felt very lonely. So I am actually glad that I was wearing the shirts, because that's how I found my first vegan friend, who actually introduced me to the local vegan community. And that's where everything started for me. But during that time, the only other thing that was available to me, I didn't know about activists. Activists, like, if they existed maybe on television, and they were kind of like very extreme and scary and did illegal things, and I'd never associated myself with those activities. So what I would do is, under the cover of darkness, I would go out and do some sidewalk chalking, right? And I did it under the cover of darkness, because even chalk on sidewalks is considered graffiti, and I'm a goody two shoes. I don't break the law. So that's how I started my activism. So immediately I felt the need that other people need to know this and to make the change that I have made. It took another about 7 years before I actually decided to get out there on the street, holding the TV screens with Anonymous for the Voiceless, showing what happens to animals inside the industry. And it took me such a long time, because for the longest time I had this internal struggle around, is it fair to expose people to such violent images without their consent? Is that in itself an act of violence? Am I going to be traumatizing people and doing more harm than good? And eventually, with that inner struggle, the voice that said people have a right to know, that voice eventually won over. So I ended up, yeah, 7 years after becoming vegan, I ended up out on the streets starting my street outreach, and I'm still doing that today.
It's interesting that you talked about the t-shirts because we started doing that as a group event now every month, and I kind of hadn't really thought about. We obviously kind of like doing it to raise awareness of specific animal topics, but you're talking about you use it as a way to also to meet other vegans as well. So I suppose it is a good way of identifying yourself as a vegan, because
Yes.
when you become vegan, you do feel quite isolated initially. I would say in the UK, it's quite good for vegans. Obviously, it could be way better, but yeah, I suppose it is a good way of identifying each other, and you know that you kind of like you're making friends, somebody who's got the same fundamental like core values, really, isn't it? Yeah,
Yes, yes. And you know what? People get so excited, and most vegans don't wear the vegan shirt. So most of them are what I call secret vegans. I don't know. They're walking around out there. I have no idea they're vegan. But
yeah,
when I'm wearing a shirt, they will come up to me and say, "I'm vegan too."
yeah,
And then we have that little connection.
yeah,
And so I'm so glad I wore that shirt on that particular day because my vegan friend was not wearing a vegan shirt, so she was the one who came up to me, and that was really the beginning of my community.
yeah. I mean, you mentioned obviously you come from a farming background and you're doing activism with Anonymous for the Voiceless, and they kind of that activism tends to be around like animals in the so-called food industry. So do you do any activism for like vivisection or any other types of animal use?
I haven't done anything related to vivisection. Actually, I have not come across any protests in relation to that in my local area.
Yeah,
Um, uh, but definitely the horse and greyhound racing industries. So I've taken
yeah,
part in protests against those. So that's
yeah,
certainly a big thing for us here.
yeah,
We have in our state of Western Australia now got a inquiry that's just been completed into the greyhound industry. We're hoping
yeah.
very much that it will be phased out over the next few years. So that could be a big win. That's been a big focus for us recently.
There's been quite a big focus. I mean, obviously we've got the horse racing and the greyhound racing here, and we think that the Wales and Scotland have voted to ban it, and Northern Ireland and England still haven't. But regardless of whether the legislation goes through, we know that the stadium that they're just dying one by one. So it is, and obviously we are watching what's happening in New Zealand and Australia as well, because we're seeing different states are banning them and different things are coming up, different discussions are coming up around those areas. So you're the vegan mindset coach, okay? So can you explain that how that works and what you do, please?
Oh, yeah. So, in a nutshell, I help vegans, fellow vegans, survive and thrive in a non-vegan world. Right. And when I'm talking about survive and thrive, I'm not talking about physical health, because you know what? There's so many amazing vegan, plant-based health,
Yeah,
nutrition, fitness coaches out there
yeah,
that part of society is really well served. What I discovered when I was going through my journey of dystopia, which is that anguish of being vegan in a non-vegan world in the first couple of years, was I couldn't find anybody who could help me. There were, psychologists, but most like I couldn't find a vegan psychologist, and I wasn't even convinced that I needed a psychologist. In fact, I was pretty sure I didn't have a condition that needed diagnosing and
yeah,
treating. I just needed some tools for being okay,
yeah,
to be able to communicate with non-vegans. Yeah, to be able to just live a happy, well-balanced life where I can show up being the change that I want to be. So I decided to basically study life coaching to help myself in the first instance. And then as I was learning all of the tools that I actually did need to survive and thrive, I was then encountering all these wonderful people in my new vegan community who were struggling with all the same things. We're all of us in this, dystopia. And I thought, well, this is it. This is my calling. I really need to be helping everyone else to acquire the tools and the skills that I have learned. Just to clarify what I mean by mindset, mindset is just a habitual way of thinking and seeing the world and showing up in the world, right? And what a lot of us tend to do when we become vegan is we start to see the world through this lens of animal abuse, of exploitation. Everywhere we go, the actions that people are taking around us, the food they're eating, the activities, the pastimes that they're engaged in, we're seeing through that lens, and we're identifying with the animals who are the victims of all of that, that exploitation. And so as we do that, we start to see the people around us as the exploiters, as the abusers. We start to see them as the predators and the perpetrators. And whereas we identify with the victims, we start to feel a little bit wary and unsafe, and like we don't no longer really know the people that we have, known and loved for the longest time, and people who we thought shared our values and also were good people who didn't want to hurt animals. Everything is now shifting. So once we start adopting that unfortunate mindset, that dystopia mindset, we start to feel a little bit victimized right along with the animals. We start to feel wary, we're very sensitized, and we become increasingly easily triggered into distress. So what my aim is to help my fellow vegans who are stuck in this situation or not knowing how to deal with it, to understand that we create our reality with our minds, and we get to adjust the way that we see the world, not in such a way that we put on the rose-colored glasses, not so that, we become Pollyanna-ish and pretend everything's okay. We still get to see the reality for what it is, but we also get to frame the world in a different way. So instead of framing non-vegans as, predators, perpetrators, animal abusers, we get to reframe them as potential vegans, right? Or future vegans, because then we get to approach them in a very different way. And of course, communication is a really, really important part of things. So what I do as the vegan mindset coach is help people to really understand how their brain works, how their mind creates their reality, how to manage their emotions and their reactions to the non-vegan world, how to avoid being traumatized by all the things that we see and that we know is going on, and then how to connect and communicate effectively with non-vegans so we draw them closer, and so that we get to be the example that they actually want to follow, rather than the weirdo vegan that they'd rather not be associated with.
Yeah. There's quite a lot of unpick there, but kind of the things which kind of jump in my mind. There's two parts to it. The trauma that we suffer because we see all this, the horrible ways which animals are used, and we shouldn't be using animals at all. And then there's the separation from our friends and family who knew us before we were vegan, and how we cope with that. We've always said in our group the worst people to speak to about us being vegan is your friends and family, because you can talk to strangers far more easily than you can talk to those who are close to you, because they see that you've changed and they feel as if they're being judged as well. But I do like what you mentioned there about, something which Georgie Casamajana, who's a writer in the UK, and he writes for Vegan FTA, and he's a campaigner and activist as well. But he calls people pre-vegans, like you said, future vegans there. So it is kind of seeing them as, we weren't always vegans, so at that point we were the same as them. So we kind of, rather than judging them for what they're doing right now, kind of looking at it as if to see that they are, potential vegans, future vegans, pre-vegan. So yeah, that's a really, really good. So how does you? Do you do consultations? Do you do workshops? Do you do online sessions? How does it work?
Oh, okay. So I do a raft of things, because my vision is for every vegan in the world to have access to,
Yeah,
the mindset tools and the skills that they
yeah,
need to survive and thrive in a
yeah,
non-vegan world, until we create that vegan
yeah.
world that we're all envisioning. So I do make a lot of things available for free, and my platform for doing that is actually a Facebook group. So I know a lot of people aren't on Facebook anymore. It's not so cool, but I do have it's a private Facebook group I've created called Unstoppable Vegans.
Yeah.
Obviously that name makes sense given what I do, because I want us to be unstoppable in
Yeah.
service of our purpose and our vision.
Mhm.
And so what I do is I show up in that group once a week, every week, and I do a 20 to 40 minute, depending on the topic, training on an issue. And it's usually mindset or communication or processing our emotions or how not to be traumatized, how to get through the Easter long weekend, how to prepare for Christmas, in terms of
Yeah.
our relationships, our communication communication, the things that we need to put into place in advance, how to create the vegan allies for ourselves, all of that. And so I do these trainings completely for free for the people inside my group. I only do it inside my groups. I don't do it on YouTube. I don't do it on Instagram for the reason that I want to do it inside a safe space, this container where people can show up and really be honest and unpack
Yeah.
their relationship with the non-vegan world without the threat of trolls coming in and giving us a hard time. So I've got a Facebook group. That's where I do all my free stuff. And then inside that group, I then offer additional free training. So where we do more of an intensive 5 days in a row, 1 hour a day. I call them challenges. So that's a little bit more intensive for people who want more. And then beyond that, yes, I absolutely do one-on-one coaching. So at the moment, my coaching is all one-on-one. So coach to client. We set up a time that suits both of us. And I have created a program specifically for the vegan. So after the last 2 years of coaching people one-on-one on whatever issues that they were bringing me, I figured out the things that pretty much every single vegan so far has needed to get the life that they wanted, to be the example, to serve their purpose. And so I've now streamlined that and made it more efficient to deliver by putting it into a sequence in a 16-week program. So I now do a 16-week program, that's my paid service that I
Yeah.
offer to people one-on-one. Yep.
So really, there's lots of ways for people to access the support and the skills that you have. I mean, I'm kind of thinking about members in our group, like the newer members, but also some of the older members like myself, because I've been a vegan for so long now, and you do kind of get a little bit jaded is probably not the right word, but it just kind of sometimes it does just wear you down. I think as well. There's so much change. I mean, it's a movement, animal rights is a movement, and it needs to change. It needs to move by definition. But I think one of our problems right now in the UK is the constant kind of trying to kind of like pull it from animal rights into animal welfare, which obviously we're not welfare, we're animal rights. So there's kind of like a lot of conflict around that. So that's kind of like like an older vegan, older activist like myself. That's kind of like the way I need help. But then newer members in our group, they're kind of coming in and seeing and kind of finding their vegan family, if you like, for the first time, the people who have the same core values. But they don't have the skills yet to deal with the constant onslaught. I mean, you're talking about key times, like Easter, Christmas, holidays. You go on, it's like you walk down the street and then you see people throwing things at birds, or you see adverts for zoos or something. So animal use is just constant, and people who accuse us of forcing it down their preaching and forcing it down their necks, they don't understand how we feel when we walk down the average street. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there is that whole range. And interestingly, Anna, what I've noticed is that people who have been vegan for decades are still very much struggling with that dystopia. So they're still experiencing that anguish, and often they have continued to accumulate so much trauma over the years. And yes, to a certain extent, they may have got jaded in terms of just having given up on their friends and family, so no longer being in that struggle. But often, when we dig a little bit, what we find is there's so much pain, there's so much unresolved stuff there, that they haven't sort of come through it in a healthy way at the other end. They've often just given up, or either given up and just allow themselves to be subjected to that ongoing trauma every time they engage with their family. They're like, you know what, this is nothing's going to change, and they just put up with it. Or they've severed connections with a lot of their family and former friends. And I don't think either of them is really a really great situation for people unless they're at peace with it. And I actually just did want to raise that in terms of the relationships. When people do continue to have these relationships with non-vegan friends and family, without properly communicating and addressing all of those issues around that, the vegan non-vegan divide, I find that so much of the trauma that we have as vegans comes from those interactions, from the Christmas dinner showdowns, the being told you're superior and shoving it down our throat. So much more of our trauma comes from that than from the actual exposure to what happens to animals. Yes, a lot of it comes from the terrible footage and the visions. But I think people are actually so much more hurt by those interpersonal interactions. So figuring out how to communicate in such a way that we feel safe with our non-vegan loved ones, that they can feel safe and not judged in our presence and not feel wary of us trying to expose them to traumatizing material. It's a two-way street. Getting that relationship right is so very, very important. So that's a really core piece to what I teach.
Mm. I'm thinking about a couple of like personal examples for me when you're saying that, because I have a couple of I mean, I would say the majority of the people who I surround myself, I choose to surround myself now, are vegan, but I do have a couple of non-vegan friends from like before I was vegan, and it's very difficult when we get together, sort of periodically, and they'll say, "What have you been up to?" And everything I've been up to is around animal rights. So it's kind of, if I sort of like sit there and list all the things I've done, and they're kind of sitting there, it's either going over their head, or they're like, I don't really want to talk about this. This is really not what. So you kind of really, I try not to ignore obviously what I do, because it's such a huge part of me. But if I'm sitting there talking about, I'm doing a vivisection event this weekend, I'm doing a greyhound protest, I'm doing a horse racing thing, I'm doing all these different things. I do say that that I do them. I do tell them that I do them, because that's who I am, and really it's not also not about me. It's about, I should use every opportunity to talk about the animals, but you can kind of see them sort of like the face kind of like drops as, oh, she's going on again. you know
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, this is such a trap for us vegans is often we don't even go in there with the intention. Like, we're just having dinner with some non-vegan friends. Our intention isn't even to like advocate necessarily specifically in that setting, but invariably they ask us a question. What
Yeah.
have you been up to? What's wrong with dairy? So why aren't you eating meat?
Yeah.
So we fall into the trap then, because when we're asked a question, it's very hard not to answer a question. And we're just answering honestly from our perspective. But of course, because the things that we're talking about are things that they're engaged in, they cannot help but feel judged in that instance, and then it's on, right? So either it goes over their head and they don't even get it and they glaze over, or they connect with it and go,
Yeah.
oh, I'm being judged in this moment, I'm engaging in that, and then they get defensive, and
Yeah.
then now we've got a battle on our hands. So a big part of that is, how do we not fall into that trap? How do we get them engaged in such a way that they stay open and don't feel judged around it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a
It,
big
it,
thing.
it is, it's a really important skill to have. And I think as well, it all depends on the frame of mind you're in, your actual mindset, kind of about how you are on that particular day, because you could have the same bunch of people getting together on one day, and then you're totally up for an open conversation, and then the next day you're too tired and you can't do it. And those are the conversations where I feel as if I'm letting the animals down, because I'm not giving them the facts, I'm not giving them um, the the honesty about what actually happens, when animals are used by humans. But yeah, it is an absolute minefield, trying to balance, friendships with non-vegans or pre-vegans. I should maybe call them pre-vegans, or future vegans. But I want to go on now a little bit about Australia now. So, so in terms of animal rights in Australia, I know it's very, very different. It's very much more animal farming oriented, and there's lots of other issues. So could you tell me, I mean, what do you have over there what we don't have in the UK? And what's it like being an activist in Australia? I mean, I know obviously I've spoken to Tash Peterson in the past, who is somebody who is very vocal and very out there activist, she's very, very different to you, and she's very different to me as well, but very, very good in her own way. So kind of what's it like being an Australian activist?
Oh gosh. Okay. So the thing in Australia is we've got a very farming culture, interestingly, even though the vast majority of us, over 80% of us, live in the cities around the
Yeah.
coastline of Australia. We still have this real cultural sense of, we kind of have like we're still Australia riding on the sheep's back kind of thing, still has that, we kind of still feel like we owe our economy and the success of our country to agriculture, which is actually false. It's a myth. It's mostly mining and tourism and students these days. But so there's a very protectiveness around farmers. So the general population, even the state-owned media, is very protective and is very much, farmers are untouchable. They're holy. Our honest, hardworking farmers are doing it tough on the land. They're working so hard to produce the food that we all need, right? That's kind of the narrative that's being sold. Realistically, the vast majority of food being produced in Australia is exported. It's not even feeding us necessarily. Certainly the animal products. And the reality is that the vast majority of those products are produced by corporations, not farmers, right? So giant cattle stations owned by billionaires, and even foreign companies are the ones exporting the livestock and so on. But people have been sold this story and continue to be sold this story, unfortunately, by mass media. And so people are very protective of farmers. So when you, as an animal rights activist, start protesting the use of animals in these food production systems, the place where people's mind generally goes to is, you're wanting to hurt our farmers, right? And the farmers are sacrosanct. But the good news is that when you actually do engage people, I would say 100% of them are against factory farming. And it doesn't take that much to convey to them that like 98% of the food that they're eating, the animal products they're eating, are coming from factory farms, not from the image of farms that they have in mind. The small farmer, they're honestly working on the land. So certainly when we do the Cube of Truth and we're holding those screens, we're showing footage from factory farms, and people are like, "That's horrible. That shouldn't be happening." When it's like, well, do you realize that like 98% of what you're having is coming from here? What you're really against is factory farms, and not against the farmer. So that's part of it. But the other thing here in Australia is that, unlike in the UK, animals haven't been recognised as being sentient. Animals here are still considered as property. So when an animal rights activist like Tash, for example, who will do the more disruptive form of activism, when those guys go onto private property, when they go onto farms, if they were to take an animal, to rescue an animal, that would be stealing property, right? So the law is very much on the side of the industry, because what the industry is doing is legal, and unfortunately animals are just property. So rescuing an animal, even if it's for the animal's own protection, doesn't count. So that makes it very hard for those the rescue type activists. Gosh, what else is there? There's also a bunch of things that are still allowed here that are no longer allowed in the UK. So things like sow stalls and battery cages, all of them are supposed to be getting phased out. There's like relevant legislation, but nobody's actually enforcing that. And unfortunately, the state body that is responsible for actually enforcing this stuff and for animal welfare, because all we have is welfare, of course, unfortunately, the same bodies are also responsible for ensuring the success of those industries. So, Fox looking after the hen house. So there's a very strong conflict of interest there. And of course, money talks. And so really the primary objective of these state government bodies is to make these industries more profitable. And then, of course, welfare always comes secondary to that. So the job of people like myself is to try to highlight that. And so another form of, I guess, activism that I'm engaged in is really advocacy, which is whenever there's opportunities, signing petitions, writing submissions to government inquiries, those kinds of actions to try and raise awareness and get the politicians to hear from us as well.
It was interesting when he talked about the law. I mean, I've been doing quite a few workshops in a school about animals and the law, and how the law protects some animals and fails other animals massively. But you were talking about the fact that the UK has recognised animals as sentient beings, which you would think is a good thing. It is a really good thing. However, you still have animals being tested on in the millions in the UK every single year in vivisection labs. But also we've had a case recently just come through the court, which happened a couple of years ago, where some beagles were taken from, we would say rescued from, liberated from an animal breeding facility in down just outside of London, and the activists have been going through the courts because they were being prosecuted for theft, theft
Mhm.
of a thing rather than a being. So the laws, although it looks as if our law has kind of like got it right, there's so many loopholes. I mean, even things like the Circuses Act. I mean, we got the Wild Animals and Circuses Act through 7 years ago, and now obviously there's loopholes because they're bringing in domestic animals. So it's kind of like they're always trying to. The animal users are constantly they're always trying to get the money from the animals, aren't they? They're trying to make their living from animals. Do you ever have conversations about the animal rights movement? It's like a social justice movement, isn't it? It's a big. Do you ever have conversations about the social justice part of it? You know how, if we look after, if we don't use animals, that it's better. Everybody benefits. The planet benefits.
Yes.
The humans benefit as well.
Yes, definitely. Yes, I absolutely. Whenever I'm having conversations with non-vegans around this, particularly if they raise the what if question, because it
Yeah.
always goes to whataboutism. It's like, well, what about humans? Shouldn't we be
Mm.
worrying about human slavery first? Like it should, because often it's like I'll worry about animals once we've solved the problem
Yeah.
of whatever we're doing to humans. Palestine, human
Yeah.
slavery, so
Mm.
on and so forth. Absolutely. Then I make that connection for them is the
Yeah.
fact that the same industries that are doing these horrible things to animals are also doing horrible things to people.
Mm.
Because it is the most disadvantaged people that are forced to work in these industries as well and suffer just as much. And there's all the related statistics around that as well. So yeah, I do my best to make the connection to both people and to environment, because environment is the other thing that people often do raise, of course.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're coming to the end of our time together now. I mean, it's that the time's flown, and I've really enjoyed talking to you. What's next for you? Then what's coming up for you?
Gosh, for me, it's really it's a lot more of the same.
Mhm.
So I'm going to continue to provide what I can for free inside my little bubble, my little Facebook group. So everyone's very much welcome to come join Unstoppable Vegans on Facebook and get that stuff for free. And I'm going to continue to deliver my program for one-on-one clients as well. And of course, I invite anyone who feels like they could do help with this. Please, yeah, get in touch. Best way to contact me is through Unstoppable Vegans or Anita Marriott on Facebook, or there is also my website, The Vegan Mindset Coach. You can get in contact with me there as well. Yeah, I'm just going to keep on going for as long as possible. I'm going to try and reach as many vegans as I possibly can, because I believe that when we are happiest, healthiest, mentally, emotionally, as well as physically, and well adjusted and living a life that we actually love, without ignoring the realities of the world, that's when we're going to be most effective at serving our purpose, doing whatever it is that we want in terms of advocacy, activism, and so forth, but also being the invitation and the example that non-vegans need.
Yeah. That sounds like a really, really good point to end on. Actually, the invitation that non-vegans need. It's really it's a really, really important service that you're providing. And I hope people watching do sort of do. I would encourage them to get in touch with you. The website, there's lots of information on there, and obviously I'm a member of the Unstoppable Vegans as well, and there's lots of really, really good things in there. But I'm gonna end now and say thank you very much. Over in Australia. It's a very, very cold day here in England. It's supposed to be lovely and sunny, but it's pretty cold here. So I don't know what it's like over there. But thank you very much for giving up your time. And we'll hopefully we'll continue following your work and watching what you're up to as well. So I'm going to sign
Thank
off
you,
now.
Anna.
You're very
It's been a
welcome.
pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to sign off now. This is Anna Amelia from Northeast Animal Rights. Thanking Anita Marriott, the vegan mindset coach, and hoping that you'll follow her and catch up with her work online as well. So thanks very much everyone for listening, and goodbye for now.